Hey guys, tonight we are going to try something a little different. We're going on a trip not to a serene beach or a quiet forest, but back in time, about 1200 years to the coast of Norway. And you're not just an observer, you're there. You've woken up in the Viking Age. Now, I know what you're thinking: horned helmets, glorious battles, epic feasts. Forget all of it. That's the highlight reel. We're here for the gritty, day-to-day reality. And let's be honest, you'd probably not make it through the first 24 hours. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you, so drop a comment below and let me know. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice isn't what you see, but what you smell. It's an assault on your modern senses. The air is thick, a heavy blanket woven from acrid wood smoke, the sour tang of unwashed bodies, the faint, sharp ammonia of animal manure. And something else, something like old grease and damp wool. You try to take a deep breath but end up in a coughing fit. Your lungs, accustomed to filtered Darren-scented candles, are protesting loudly. You crack your eyes open, but it doesn't help much. The world is a murky, shifting darkness, pierced only by the sullen, orange glow of a fire pit a few meters away. There are no windows, not a single one. The only light source is this central hearth, and its smoke doesn't rise gracefully into a chimney. Instead, it lazily drifts upwards, staining the low, thatched roof in a layer of black soot before finding a small, designated hole to escape through. It's a terribly inefficient system. Your eyes are already watering, stinging from the constant irritation. As your vision slowly adapts, shapes begin to emerge from the gloom. You're not alone. You're surrounded by bodies. Dozens of them. They lie on wide, wooden platforms that run the length of the building, cocooned in rough, hairy blankets. You hear a symphony of snores, from deep, guttural rumbles to high-pitched, whistling wheezes, punctuated by the occasional cough or a sleepy murmur. You're packed in like sardines, shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers whose names you don't know. Personal space is a concept that hasn't been invented yet. Something wet and bristly nudges your hand. You flinch, pulling your arm back, and your eyes focus on the culprit, a goat, staring at you with its strange, rectangular pupils before letting out a soft bleat. You look up and see chickens roosting in the rafters overhead. Their droppings are very real and present danger. Yes, you're not just sharing your bedroom with 30 or 40 other humans, you're sharing it with their livestock too. Bringing the more valuable animals inside wasn't just a convenience, it was a necessity for their survival. And by extension yours. This place, you realize, is a longhouse, the famous Viking dwelling. But it's not the grand, high-siding hall of the movies. It's a long, narrow, low-slung structure with curved walls that make it look a bit like an overturned boat. The walls are made of timber planks or wattle and daub. And the roof is thick turf, great for insulation, but also a perfect term for insects and mice. The floor beneath you is just hard-packed earth, cold and damp. You're lying on one of the side benches, the designated sleeping area, but your position near the far end, away from the warmth of the fire, tells you everything you need to know about your status here. You're at the bottom of the pecking order. The air quality is a serious concern. Historians and archaeologists still debate just how effective that single smoke hole was. Some argue that the specific curvature of the roof and clever positioning of doors created a surprisingly effective draft. Others believe that a life spent in a longhouse was a life spent with chronic respiratory problems, eye infections, and a constant, low-grade carbon monoxide headache. Based on the burning in your throat, you're inclined to believe the latter. The romance of the Viking hearth is quickly extinguished by the gritty reality of it. You pull the scratchy wool blanket up to your nose, a futile attempt to filter the air, and watch the shadows dance on the soot-stained walls. A baby starts crying somewhere in the darkness, a thin, reedy wail that cuts through the snoring. The day hasn't even begun, and you're already questioning everything. The baby's cry doesn't stop. It becomes the soundtrack to the longhouse slowly stirring to life, One by one, the sleeping forms around you begin to move. They groan, they stretch, they sit up, their joints popping in the cold morning air. There's no gentle waking here, no hitting the snooze button. The moment of consciousness is immediately followed by the necessity of movement. As more people rise, a clear and unspoken hierarchy reveals itself. A mountain of a man who had been sleeping in the warmest, most privileged spot right next to the central hearth sits up. His beard is a thick, braided tangle of red and grey, and his arms are like small tree trunks. He doesn't just occupy space, he commands it. This is the Bondi, the master of this farmstead, the head of the household. The others, even in their half-asleep state, seem to orbit him, respectful tones, and he responds with a grunt or a nod. His authority is absolute and unquestioned. Then, another figure moves with purpose through the gloom. A woman, chestnut young, with a face edged by worry and hard work. But she carries herself with an air of immense competence. This is the HUS Fraser, the lady of the house. And you notice a peculiar detail. From a belt around her waist hangs a heavy ring of iron keys. This isn't just a practical accessory, it's a powerful symbol. She holds the keys to every locked chest and storeroom in the longhouse. She controls the food supplies, the textiles, the wealth. While the Bondi might be the public face of the family, she is the undisputed ruler of this domestic kingdom. Her gaze sweeps across the room, assessing, calculating. Nothing escapes her notice. Her power is a quiet, steady hum beneath the man's overt authority. Next in line are the Carlay, the free men. These are the master's sons, his brothers, and other skilled farmhands or warriors sworn to his service. They look better fed and more confident than the others. They stretch and immediately start checking their gear, a knife here, a tool there. They are the backbone of the household, the ones who will work the fields, hunt in the forests, and if the time comes, form a shield wall to defend this very house. They talk amongst themselves, their voices louder, sharing jokes you don't understand. They move with an ease that tells you they belong here. And then there are the others, the ones who move silently along the edges of the room, their eyes downcast. They are the first to be fully awakened, the first to start working. An old woman is already tending the fire, skillfully adding dried peat to coax it back to a roaring life. A young boy is carrying a bucket of well. You don't want to know it's in it out of the longhouse. These are the thralls, the slaves. They are captured people from raids, or the children of thralls, or individuals who fell into debt. They are property with no rights, no voice, and no freedom. And as you sit there on your cold, hard plank bed, you realize with a sinking feeling that this is the group you've been lumped in with. You find yourself wondering, as you watch these distinct groups go about their morning rituals, could a person climb this ladder, could a thrall, through some extraordinary act or sheer luck, earn their freedom and become a Carl, could a successful Carl accumulate enough wealth and followers to one day become a Bondi himself, master of his own longhouse? The Norse sagas, the epic stories they would tell around the fire on long winter nights, are filled with tales of heroes rising from humble origins, but historical evidence is more complicated. Archaeologists often point to grave goods, the items buried with a person, which suggests a very rigid social structure. A chieftain is buried with his sword, his treasures, maybe even a sacrificed horse. A thrall is buried with nothing. The question of social mobility in the Viking Age is one that historians are still fiercely debating, piecing together clues from legal texts, sagas, and burial sites. Your philosophical musings are cut short by a sharp nudge. It's not the goat this time. It's a young woman, not much older than you, with a perpetually tired look on her face. She doesn't speak to you. She simply shoves a heavy, rough-hewn wooden bucket into your hands and points a finger towards the low, hide-covered doorway. The message is clear. You are a resource, and your first task is to fetch water from the well, outside. In the biting pre-dawn Nordic cold, the splintery wood digging into your soft hands and stumble towards the exit, into the unknown. The cold hits you like a physical blow. You step out of the longhouse and the relatively stable, smoky warmth is instantly replaced by a damp, piercing chill that seems to find every gap in your borrowed, ill-fitting tunic. The ground is a semi-frozen mud, a treacherous landscape of muck and ice. The sun is not yet up, but the eastern sky is a bruised purple, promising a day that will be more grey than bright. The air, at least, is fresh, a welcome relief after the stale atmosphere inside, but it carries the scent of pine and frozen earth and, yes, still manure. You can't escape that smell. You follow the path to the well, a simple stone-lined hole in the ground with a wooden winch that looks perilously rickety. Your hands are already numb as you lower the bucket, the rope coarsened and forgiving against your skin. The bucket hits the water with a dull thud, and you begin the arduous task of hauling it back up. It's heavier than you expected, and by the time you wrestle it to the surface, your arms are burning and your back is aching. And you have to do this multiple times. Back inside the longhouse, the central fire is now blazing, casting a warm and lively light. The HUS Fraser, the lady of the house, is overseeing the morning's first and most important meal. Forget your modern concept of breakfast: no pancakes, no cereal, no avocado toast. What you're about to eat is designed for one purpose: to provide enough fuel for a long day of hard physical labor. The meal is called dugur or day meal. It's a communal affair. A giant cauldron, big enough to bathe a child in, hangs over the fire, bubbling away. The contents are uninspiring. It's a thick, greyish porridge, a pottage made from whatever grains are available: barley, oats, maybe some rye boiled in water, or, if you're lucky, milk. Into this to goes whatever else is on hand. Some chopped root vegetables like turnips and carrots, perhaps some hardy greens like cabbage. There might be small chunks of salted fish or leftover meat from last night's dinner. But today is not a good week. It looks like just grained vegetables. There are no individual plates. A woman at the thrall ladles the steaming gloop into rough-hewn wooden bowls. You're handed one, and you look around for a spoon. You see some of the higher status family members using carved wooden or bone spoons, but you are not offered one. You watch what the other thralls are doing and follow suit to use a piece of hard, dense bread to scoop up the porridge. The bread is flat brd, a simple, unleavened flatbread made from barley flour and water, cooked on a hot stone. It's tough, chewy, and about as flavorful as cardboard, but it serves as an edible utensil. You take your first bite. It's hot, which is good. But it's also bland. Incredibly bland. Salt is a valuable commodity, used more for preserving food than for seasoning it, so it's used sparingly. The primary flavor profile is earthy. The porridge is thick and sticks to your ribs, which is the whole point. There's no time to savour it. You eat quickly, huddled with the other low status members, because as soon as the bowls are empty, the day's work begins. You're given a cup of something called bland or whey. It's the watery liquid left over from cheese making, slightly sour and thin. The Carly and the Bondi are drinking ale, even at this early hour, but that's a luxury you're not afforded. You might be surprised to learn that Vikings, despite their brutal reputation, had a surprisingly varied diet when conditions allowed. They farmed, they fished, they hunted, and they foraged. They ate beef, pork, lamb, and goat. They hunted deer, elk, and even bear. Coastal communities enjoyed a bounty of fish, from cod and herring to salmon, which they would salt, smoke, or dry for the long winters. They also collected wild berries, nuts, and mushrooms. The problem was consistency. A bad harvest, a long winter, or a failed fishing season could mean months of near starvation, subsisting on little more than the kind of bland porridge you're eating right now. Archaeologists examining Viking skeletons often find evidence of malnutrition and periods of arrested development in the bones, a clear sign of seasonal hunger. The academic debate here often revolves around just how much of their diet came from raiding. Did they raid to supplement a poor harvest? Or was raiding a primary economic activity in its own right, a way for ambitious chieftains to acquire wealth and followers? Some scholars argue that was a response to climate pressures and land shortages in Scandinavia, while others see it as a calculated, entrepreneurial pursuit of luxury goods. Silver and slaves is probably somewhere in the middle. But for you, sitting on this cold floor, forcing down another mouthful of gritty porridge, the grand economic theories don't matter. What matters is the gnawing feeling in your stomach and the knowledge that this meager meal has to last you for many, many hours. Now that you've choked down your bland breakfast, the longhouse empties out as everyone disperses to their morning chores. But you've been assigned a task that keeps you inside. The HUS Fraser points to a pile of dirty, greasy wool in the corner and then to a loom standing in the dim light. Your job is weaving. It sounds domestic, almost peaceful, but this new perspective allows you to see the longhouse not as a home, but as a collection of ever-present hazards. First, let's talk about the fire again. It's the heart of the house, the source of light and warmth, but it's also a monster held on a very flimsy leash. The entire longhouse is a tinderbox. The walls are timber, the roof is thatch supported by wooden beams, and the floor is often strewn with dry straw for insulation and to soak up, well, everything. All it would take is one stray spark from the central hearth, one clumsy stumble from someone carrying a torch, and this entire structure could go up in flames in minutes. There are no fire extinguishers, no emergency exits, no smoke alarms. Your only hope is to get out through one of the two main doors before the flaming roof collapses. The fear of fire was a constant, low-level hum in the background of Viking life. Archaeological digs frequently uncover the charred remains of longhouses, a grim testament to how often this fear became a reality. Then there's the smoke. You thought it was bad when you were just lying down. Now that you're up and moving, trying to concentrate on the complex task of weaving, it's even worse. It perpetually stings your eyes, making the intricate work of managing the threads a blurry nightmare. You find yourself coughing constantly, a dry, hacking cough that irritates your throat. You look at the older women in the longhouse and notice a common affliction as quint, a permanent furrowing of the brow from a lifetime of peering through the haze. Chronic eye and lung diseases, as mentioned before, were likely as common as a cold. And what about hygiene or the lack thereof? You're in a confined space with 40 people and a handful of animals. The concept of germ theory is 1,000 years in the future. People cough and sneeze without covering their mouths. The water you fetch from the well is shared by everyone for drinking, cooking, and a minimal amount of washing. It's a breeding ground for bacteria. A simple cut on your finger, a common injury from farm work or domestic chores, could easily become infected. With no antibiotics, a small infection could lead to sepsis and death. Diseases like dysentery, influenza, and tuberculosis would have swept through a crowded longhouse like wildfire. This brings us to a weirdly fascinating cold case for historians, the mystery of the Icelandic plagues. The sagas described devastating epidemics that wiped out large portions of the population. But for a long time, there was no archaeological evidence to back this up. Some scholars speculated these were fictional events to add drama to the stories. But recently, genetic analysis of ancient teeth found in Iceland has revealed the DNA of the pathogen that plagued death. Or a similar pestilence did indeed reach this isolated island centuries ago. It's a chilling reminder of how vulnerable these communities were. Let's not forget your roommates, the animals. The goat that nudged you earlier is now attempting to chew on the hem of your tunic. The chickens in the rafters are a constant source of noise and, more worryingly, droppings. While bringing livestock inside saved them from the cold, it also meant living in close proximity to their parasites. Fleas, lice, and intestinal worms were not just a nuisance, they were a fact of life. You feel an itch on your scalp and try very hard not to think about it. The close quarters living with animals is a primary vector for zoonotic diseases, a concept we've all become uncomfortably familiar with recently. You look around the longhouse again. The floor you notice isn't just dirt, it's a compacted layer of dirt, spilled food, animal waste, and generations of grime. While some longhouses had drainage gullies, many did not. Waste was simply swept out the door, more often, just trampled into the floor. This filth was another perfect breeding ground for disease. The idyllic, rustic image of the Viking home is shattered. It's dark, it's smoky, it's crowded, and it's fundamentally unsanitary. You're trying to weave, but your mind is racing, cataloging all the ways this building could kill you before the sun even reaches its zenith. It dawns on you that for a Viking, the most dangerous battlefield wasn't in a foreign land, it was the floor of their own home. You're struggling with the loom, your fingers clumsy and slow on the threads, when the HUS Fraser approaches. She watches you for a moment, a frown deepening the lines on her face. She says something sharp and quick in Old Norse that you don't understand, but her tone is universal. You're terrible at this. She then gestures for you to stand up and points to your clothes, the drab, scratchy, one-size-fits-all tunic you were given. She seems to have decided you're more trouble than you're worth at the loom and has a new task for you: laundry. She leads you to a chest, one of the few pieces of furniture in the longhouse, and unlocks it with one of the keys from her belt. Inside are clothes. Not the rough, undyed wool of the thralls, but garments of surprising color and texture. She pulls out a few items and hands them to you, along with a wooden bucket and a chunk of lice that smells acrid and unpleasant. Your job is to take them down to the river and wash them. As you handle the clothes, you're forced to confront your preconceived notions about Viking fashion. Forget the drab browns and greys you see in movies. These people loved color. You see a tunic dyed a deep, rich blue, likely from the woad plant. Another piece is a vibrant red, a color extracted from the root of the madder plant. There are even hints of yellow from Weldon green from a complex process of over-dyeing. These dyes were expensive and labor-intensive to produce, making colorful clothing a clear status symbol. The Bondian whose family wore their wealth right on their backs. The fabric itself is also a surprise. While your own tunic is coarse wool, some of these are made of a much finer, softer wool, a testament to skilled spinning and weaving. There are also items made of linen, processed from the flax plant. Linen was smoother and more comfortable against the skin, often used for undergarments. The clothes are functional, designed for a cold climate, with layers being key. A typical outfit for a man might be a linen undertunic, or wool overtunic, trousers either baggy or fitted, and a cloak pinned at the shoulder with a brooch. Women wore a long linen underdress, with a distinctive suspended overdress, often called an apron dress or smock kr, held up by two large, ornate brooches on the shoulders. But the most surprising discovery is what you find tucked into the fold of one of the tunics: a comb. It's not a cheap piece of plastic. It's beautifully carved from bone or armor, with intricate geometric patterns etched into its surface. You then notice that many of the Karlaya have similar combs tucked into their belts. This shatters another myth. Far from being dirty, unkempt barbarians, Vikings were almost obsessively concerned with personal grooming. Archaeological digs have unearthed an astonishing number of combs, tweezers, ear spoons, and even razors. They washed regularly at least once a week, on a day called Laugarda Gua washing day, which is the origin of the modern Scandinavian words for Saturday. This fastidious grooming was so notable that it was even commented on by their contemporaries. An English chronicler, John of Wallingford, complained that the Danish Vikings in England were far too popular with the local women because they combed their hair daily, bathed every Saturday and changed their clothes frequently. In a world where much of Europe considered bathing a suspicious and potentially unhealthy activity, the Vikings' cleanliness made them stand out. Historians are still debating the exact motive. Was it purely for hygiene and appearance, or did it have a ritual or social significance? Some argue that neat hair and a clean beard were signs of a disciplined, respectable man, distinguishing him from a wild outlaw or a lowly thrall. As you head to the river, this paradox sticks with you. They lived in smoky, dirty houses with their animals, yet they were meticulous about their hair. They ate bland, unseasoned porridge, but wore clothes dyed in vibrant, joyful colors. They were a people of stark contrasts. You reach the riverbank, the water so cold it makes your teeth ache just looking at it. You kneel on the frozen ground, dip the first colorful tunic into the icy water, and your hands scream in protest, stripping the oils from your skin. This isn't just washing clothes, it's a test of endurance. You look at your reflection in the water, your face smudged with soot, your hair a mess, and think about that fancy burn comb. In this world, even the simple act of being clean and presentable was a luxury, a privilege you had to earn. Your hands are raw and red, throbbing with the painful, bone-deep cold by the time you finish the laundry. You hang the wet, heavy garments over a bush, hoping the weak sun and biting wind will do their work, and trudge back towards the farmstead. Your brief, painful foray into domestic service is over. Now, the real work begins. One of the Karlayar, a broad-shouldered man named Bjorn with a surprisingly patient demeanor, leads you away from the longhouse and towards the fields. This, he communicates with a series of simple gestures, is where you'll be spending the rest of your day. The idyllic image of a Viking warrior, axe in hand, sailing off to distant lands, is a powerful one, but it's alive of Viking Age. Life was not defined by the longship, but by the land. They were farmers first, warriors second. The farm you're on isn't a vast, sprawling plantation. It's a modest plot of land carved out of a dense dark forest. The soil is rocky and thin. This is the reality of agriculture in Scandinavia. The land is unforgiving. You're handed a tool. It's not a tractor, not even a plow pulled by an ox. It's an ard, a primitive scratch plow. It's essentially a pointed wooden stick, maybe tipped with a little bit of iron if the owner is wealthy, that you have to drag through the soil. Its purpose isn't to turn the earth over, but simply to cut a shallow furrow for planting seeds. Your job is to guide it. Bjorn takes the front, pulling it with a rope harness slung over his shoulders, his muscles straining. You're at the back, your hands gripping the handle, trying to keep the point digging into the earth at the right depth. It's brutal, back-breaking work. The ard catches on rocks, sending jarring vibrations up your arms. It's kitteress over frozen patches of ground. Within an hour your back is a knot, your hands are covered in blisters, and you are coated in a layer of sweat and dirt despite the cold. You look around at the other fields. You see men and women, young and old, all engaged in the same relentless struggle against the earth. Some are clearing new land, a slow, arduous process of felling trees with axes and then painstakingly digging out the stumps. Others are breaking up clods of earth with hoes or mattocks. In another field, children are walking behind the sowers, their small hands throwing stones at crows to keep them from eating the precious seeds. It's a full family, full community effort, and there is no room for shirkers. This hard labor is for a meager return. They grow hardy grains like barley, oats and rye which can survive the short growing season. They also cultivate beans, peas and cabbages. But crop yields were low. A bad year to little rain, too much rain. An early frost could be catastrophic. It meant the difference between having enough food to survive the winter and starvation. This constant, grinding uncertainty was the central fact of their existence. It's a far cry from the carefree, feasting warriors of legend. This brings up a fascinating niche of historical study, experimental archaeology. To truly understand the realities of Viking Age farming, some historians and archaeologists don't just read texts, they try to live it. They build replica longhouses, forge their own tools, and attempt to cultivate crops using only the methods and seeds available 1200 years ago. These experiments consistently reveal just how incredibly difficult it was. They find that the energy expended in farming with primitive tools barely covers the caloric intake from the harvest itself. It's a life lived perpetually on the edge of subsistence. It's this grim reality that helps you understand the allure of raiding. When you're breaking your back in a cold, rocky field for a harvest that might fail, the idea of getting on a boat and taking someone else's wealth becomes not just an option, but a logical, almost necessary alternative. It wasn't always about bloodlust, sometimes it was about survival. As the day wears on, the work never stops. There are no coffee breaks, no lunch hour. You pause only to gulp some water from a water skin and chew on another piece of hard, dry flatbread. You watch Bjorn. He works with a steady, rhythmic pace, his body accustomed to the strain. He is a farmer. He is also a warrior. You notice the calluses on his hands from the yard, but you also see the long, faded scar on his forearm. The farmer and the raider were not two different people, they were often the same man, his life divided by the seasons. In the spring and summer, he fought the soil. When the crops were planted or harvested, he might pick up his axe and shield and go to sea, fighting other men. For you, struggling to pull a wooden stick through the dirt, the idea of having enough energy left over for a battle is inconceivable. Your survival depends on this field. And right now, it feels like the field is winning. The sun, which was never particularly enthusiastic, begins its slow descent, painting the grey sky with pale shades of orange and pink. Your body is a symphony of aches. Bjorn finally calls a halt to the work in the fields. You assume this means you can collapse back in the longhouse, but you are mistaken. You see people from all over the farmstead, men from the fields, women from their looms, Craftsmen from their workshops all walking towards a large, open clearing dominated by a huge mound of earth. You learn is the local ling or thing, the assembly. This isn't just a casual get-together. It's the cornerstone of Viking Age law and governance. In a society without a centralized government, police force, or written legal code in the modern sense, the thing was where justice was administered, disputes were settled, laws were remembered and recited, and political decisions were made. It was part parliament, part courthouse, and part community meeting, all held in the open air. Today's session seems to be about a dispute. Two men are brought forward. One is accusing the other of stealing a cow. There are no lawyers in robes, no judges with gavels. Instead, both men present their case directly to the assembled free men. They call witnesses who come forward to swear oaths on a sacred ring, often dipped in the blood of a sacrificed animal, to attest to the truth of their testimony. The power of an oath was immense. To swear a false oath was a terrible crime, not just against the community, but against the gods, and it was believed to bring ruin upon the oath breaker and his family. As the arguments fly back and forth, you realize how personal and participatory this system is. Justice isn't some abstract concept handed down by a distant king, it's a community affair. Every free man present has a right to listen, to form an opinion, and ultimately to voice it. After the evidence and testimonies are heard, the law speaker summarizes the relevant laws. Then, the chieftains and landowners confer. In some cases, the final verdict is decided by them. The entire assembly of free men would vote, often by clashing their weapons against their shields to show approval. The cow thief is found guilty. His punishment isn't a jail sentence. Prisons were not a feature of this society. Instead, he is ordered to pay a hefty fine, a compensation to the man he wronged, calculated in units of silver or the value of livestock. This system of fines, or WER guild, was the bedrock of their justice. Almost any crime, even murder, could theoretically be settled by paying a fine to the victim's family. Though the price for a high-status individual could be ruinously expensive, the goal wasn't just punishment but the restoration of social harmony and the prevention of a blood feud. This raises a question that still sparks debate among legal historians: how effective was this system really? Was it a surprisingly democratic and functional form of grassroots governance, as some sagas portray it, or was it a system heavily skewed in favor of the rich and powerful, where a wealthy chieftain could literally get away with murder simply by paying for it, while a poor farmer could be ruined by a single fine? The evidence suggests that while the principles were egalitarian for free men, in practice, wealth, reputation, and the number of powerful relatives you had mattered immensely. A man with no influential family to back him up would find it very difficult to get a fair hearing against a powerful jarl. You as a thrall have no voice here. You are property. If someone were to harm you, the fine would be paid not to you, but to your master, as compensation for damaging his asset. You are an observer, entirely outside the legal framework that protects the men shouting and arguing in the clearing. The thing is a powerful display of community solidarity and order, but it's also a stark reminder of your own powerlessness. The verdict is accepted, the fine is agreed upon, and the assembly begins to break up. A potential blood feud has been averted, and the fragile social fabric has been mended, at least for today. Just as the thing is concluding and people are beginning to drift back towards their longhouses for the evening meal, a new tension crackles through the air. The dispute over the stolen cow was settled with fines and laws, but this next conflict feels different. It's raw, personal, and fueled by something far more potent than livestock: insulted honor. Two young Corlear, both from prominent families, are standing face to face in the middle of the now emptying clearing. Their friends are trying to hold them back, but the anger between them is a palpable force. You piece together the story from the heated fragments of Old Norse you can understand, mixed with universal body language. One man, Leif, accused the other, Eric, of cowardice during a past raid. Eric, in turn, insulted Leif's sister. In the Viking world, these are not mere words. They are attacks on a person's rapport, their honor and reputation, the very core of their identity. Such an insult, left unanswered, would bring shame not just upon the individual, but upon their entire family. A fine won't settle this, This requires a more full, more violent, and more final resolution. This calls for a Holmganga ritualized duel. The word itself means a walk on a small island, which is where these duels originally took place, to prevent either party from fleeing. Over time, an occasion became more symbolic. A space is cleared and a croak or animal hide, roughly 3 meters square, is laid on the ground. The rules are recited aloud, specific and rigid. The combatants will stand on the hide. They are allowed a certain number of shields, often 3. They will trade blows in a turn-based fashion, and you are a coward. Break your sword and you must continue with whatever weapons remain. The duel is not a chaotic brawl, it is a legal proceeding, a trial by combat to determine who is in the right. The gods, it was believed, would grant victory to the one whose cause was just. Leif and Derek, their faces grim and set, take their positions on the hide. They are stripped to the waist despite the evening chill. They each hold a round shield and a single-edged sword, the workhorse weapon of the Viking Age known as a CX. The crowd, which had been dispersing, now forms a tight, silent circle. This is not entertainment, it's a deadly serious affair. The master of your longhouse and the other chieftains stand as witnesses, ensuring the rules are followed. The first blow is struck. Leif, the accuser, goes first. He brings his sword down in a powerful arc, and Derek catches it on his shield with a loud crack of wooden iron. The shield boss, the metal dome in the center, holds, but the wooden planks around it splinter. Now it is Eric's turn. He lunges and Leif parries, the sharp clang of steel on steel echoing in the twilight. This is not the elegant, flashy sword fighting of Hollywood. It's brutal, clumsy, and terrifyingly real. The goal is not to disarm your opponent, but to disable them, to get past their shield and land a single, decisive blow. They are close, too close, hacking and shoving, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The shields are quickly ruined, splintered and useless. They are cast aside. Now it is just steel, flesh, and desperation. Eric sees an opening. He finds high and then slashes low at Leif's slate. The blade connects. A deep, rayed gash opens up on Leif's thigh, and he stumbles, crying out in pain. He's still standing, but his mobility is gone. The duel is effectively over. Under the rules of Holmgang, the first blood drawn often ends the fight. Leif has lost. His honor is not satisfied. His honor is not satisfied. He will live, but the wound is severe. In a world without modern medicine, a deep cut like that is a life-threatening injury. Infection is a near certainty, but the social wound is just as deep. He and his family will have to live with the shame of this defeat. The practice of the Holmgang is a subject of much scholarly fascination and debate. Early on, it seems to have been a genuine, if brutal, legal instrument, but the sagas tell of a later period where it became corrupted. Cunning warriors, known as berserkers or professional duelists, would exploit the system. They would travel the land, legally challenging landowners for their property, their wives, or their wealth, knowing they were almost certain to win the ensuing duel. It became a form of legal extortion, so problematic that the Holmgang was eventually outlawed in Iceland and Norway in the 11th century. You watch as Leif's family helps him limp away, a trail of blood dark on the ground behind them. Eric stands tall, his chest heaving, his honor restored. The crowd dissolves, speaking in hushed tones. You've just witnessed how quickly a trivial argument can escalate into a life-altering and potentially life-ending event. It's a chilling lesson in the fragility of life and the immense weight of honor in this harsh, unforgiving world. The incident of the duel casts a long shadow over the evening meal. The mood in the longhouse is subdued. The porridge tastes even brander than it did this morning. But just when you think the day's display of Viking justice is over, another drama unfolds. This one is quieter, more insidious, but in many ways, far more terrifying. A man you don't recognize is dragged into the longhouse by 2 of the Bondi's warriors. He is not from your farmstead. He is haggard, his clothes are in tatters, and there's a wild, desperate look in his eyes. He is forced to his knees before the master of the house. The HUS Frager whispers to one of the other women, and you catch a single, chilling word: Skogge Armar, a forest man. The last speaker from the thing, who is a guest in your house tonight, stands up. He begins to speak, his voice calm and steady, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. He recounts the man's crimes. This man, named Gunnar, was found guilty at a thing 3 months ago for killing his neighbor in a dispute over land boundaries. He was unable to pay the WER Guild, the blood money, to the victim's family. As a result, the assembly declared him an outlaw. This isn't like being a wanted criminal in our world. Being declared an outlaw in the Viking Age was a form of civic death. Gunnar was stripped of all his property, all his rights, and all his protections under the law. He was quite literally outside of society. The term Skargeamar was literal. He was expected to flee to the forests or the mountains, to live like a wild animal, because he was no longer considered fully human. The consequences were dire. Any person who gave him food, shelter, or any form of aid would themselves be punished. His wife could legally remarry, as if he were dead. His children were disinherited. And the most terrifying part, any man could kill him on sight without any legal penalty. In fact, killing a known outlaw was often seen as a public service, a way of cleansing the community. The man who killed an outlaw was entitled to a portion of the outlaw's confiscated property. He wasn't just a fugitive, he was a walking bounty. Gunnar pleads for mercy. He talks of his starving family, of the brutal cold, of the madness that comes from total isolation. He was caught scavenging for food near the edge of your farmstead's property. He didn't steal anything, he just got too close. But his presence here is a violation. The Bondi looks at him, his face unreadable in the firelight. He has a choice. He could, perhaps, take pity and let the man go, telling him never to return. But that carries its own risks. Harboring an outlaw, even passively, could be seen as an insult to the family of the man Gunnar killed, potentially starting a new feud. It could also be seen as a sign of weakness. The decision is swift and brutal. The master of the house gives a short, sharp nod to his warriors. They haul Gunnar to his feet and drag him back outside into the darkness. You don't see what happens next, but you hear it. A short, sharp cry, quickly silenced. There is no trial, no appeal. The sentence was passed months ago at the thing. This is merely its execution. The concept of outlawry is one of the most chilling aspects of Norse society, and it raises complex questions for historians. Was it a pragmatic way to deal with criminals in a society without a prison system, or was it an incredibly cruel form of social control, designed to enforce conformity and punish anyone who stepped too far out of line? The Icelandic sagas are filled with the stories of famous outlaws, like Greta the Strong and Gisli Sua Sson. These tales often portray the outlaws as tragic, larger-than-life heroes battling against a harsh fate. They are romanticized. But the reality, which you have just glimpsed, was likely far from romantic. It was a life of constant fear, hunger, and paranoia. Skeletons found in bogs and other remote locations, showing signs of a violent death, are sometimes hypothesized by archaeologists to be the remains of such outlaws, killed far from home and denied a proper burial. The debate centers on how common this punishment was. Was it a last resort for the most heinous crimes, or was it used more frequently for political or personal reasons, a way for powerful chieftains to eliminate their rivals legally? The warriors returned to the longhouse, their faces grim. They wash their hands in a basin of water. Life inside continues as if nothing happened. The conversation picks back up. Someone tells a joke, but you can't shake the image of Gunnar's desperate face. You have just learned the ultimate price of failing to fit into this society. It isn't just death. It isn't just death. It's erasure. To be made an outlaw was to have your existence nullified, to be turned into a ghost while you were still alive, hunted by every man you met. It's a fate that makes the prospect of a quick death in a duel seem almost merciful. The execution of the outlaw Gunnar leaves a sour taste in the air, a grim reminder of the finality of Viking justice. As the night deepens, the fire in the central hearth is built up, casting flickering, monstrous shadows on the walls. The hard work of the day is done, and this is the time for stories. The law speaker, the guest of honor, is prevailed upon to speak not of law, but of legends. He begins to tell a tale of a great enemy king, a blasphemer who defied the gods. and the terrible vengeance that was visited upon him by a legendary Viking hero. He lowers his voice, and a hush falls over the longhouse. He speaks of a ritual, a method of execution so horrific, so profoundly cruel, that it was reserved for only the most hated of enemies. He speaks of the boar and the blood eagle. As the law speaker describes it, the ritual is a waking nightmare. The victim is forced to lie face down. The executioner, using a sharp knife, cuts the ribs away from the spine one by one. Then, the ribs are pried outwards, creating a pair of gruesome, wing-like appendages. The final, ghastly act is to pull the victim's lungs out through the openings in their back and lay them over the lungs as the victim slowly expires. Is said to resemble the gentle flapping of an eagle's wings. It is an offering to Odin, a sacrifice of unimaginable agony. A shudder runs through you. The story is told with a grim relish, a cautionary tale about the price of defying the great Viking chieftains and their gods. The children in the longhouse listen with wide, terrified eyes. For the people gathered here, this is not just a horror story, it's a part of their cultural memory, a symbol of ultimate power and righteous fury. But as you listen, the modern, skeptical part of your brain kicks in. Is this real? Did the Vikings actually perform this horrifying ritual? Or is it just a piece of gruesome propaganda, a dark legend created to intimidate their enemies and entertain themselves on long winter nights? You have stumbled upon one of the most contentious and hotly debated topics in Viking studies. For centuries, the blood eagle was accepted as historical fact. It appears in several Norse sagas and poems, often described in lurid detail as the fate of figures like King Lla of Northern Brema, who was allegedly subjected to it by the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok in revenge for their father's death. Early historians took these accounts at face value. However, in the late 20th century, scholars began to question the narrative. They pointed out several problems. First, there is no contemporary, eyewitness account of a blood eagle execution. All the descriptions come from Norse sagas and poetry that were written down to 300 years after the events they describe by Christian authors in Iceland. These authors were writing epic literature, not strict historical chronicles. They were prone to exaggeration and dramatic flair. Furthermore, the language used in the original Old Norse texts is often ambiguous. The phrase to carve an eagle on someone's back could be interpreted literally as the horrific ritual, or it could be a complex poetic metaphor, a kenning, for simply killing someone and leaving their corpse to be torn apart by carrion birds like eagles. It might have been a literary invention, a misunderstanding of older, more obscure poetry that was then embellished over generations of storytelling. Some historians argue it was Christian propaganda, created by writers to portray their pagan ancestors as monstrously barbaric, thereby highlighting the civilizing influence of their new faith. The debate rages on. One camp of historians maintains that the consistency of the descriptions across multiple sources suggests a real ritual, even if it was rare. They argue that the Vikings were certainly capable of extreme ritual violence, as evidenced by archaeological finds of human sacrifices. A recent study by medical doctors and anatomists even concluded that the procedure, while monstrous, is anatomically possible, though the victim would have died from blood loss and shock very early in the process, long before the lungs could be flapped. The other camp insists that without a single piece of archaeological evidence or a contemporary account, the blood eagle must be relegated to the realm of myth. It's a powerful story, they say, but it's not history. It remains a fascinating academic puzzle. As the law speaker finishes his tale, the fire crackles, and no one speaks. The image he has painted is seared into everyone's mind. Real or not, the idea of the blood eagle served a purpose. It was a powerful tool. It reinforced the authority of the chieftains. It terrified their enemies, and it served as a brutal expression of a warrior culture's values of revenge and honor. You look into the embers of the fire and realize that in this world, sometimes the story is more powerful than the truth, and the story of the blood eagle is a story that will keep you awake long after the fire has died down. The horrifying tale of the blood eagle has killed any desire for sleep you might have had. The longhouse is finally settling down for the night, the embers of the fire casting a low red glow. You are exhausted, your body a collection of aches and bruises, but your mind is still racing. As you lie on your hard plank bed, you become acutely aware of the social landscape of this single crowded room. You see the Bondi and his wife in their privileged spot by the fire. The car lay on their families nearby. And then there's you, and the others who share your fate. The thralls. You've been treated as one of them all day, given the worst chores, the blandest food, the coldest sleeping spot. Now in the quiet of the night, you truly start to see them. You see the young woman who handed you the water bucket this morning. She's asleep now, but her face, even in repose, looks worn out, far beyond her years. You see the old woman who tends the fire, her back prominently stooped. You see the boy who mucks out the animal stalls, his hands calloused and raw. They aren't just a faceless undercast, they are individuals trapped. How did they get here? The answer is a grim catalogue of Viking Age life. Many, perhaps most, were captured in raids. When Viking longships descended on a coastal village in Ireland, England, or Francia, they weren't just after gold and silver. They were after people. Humans were a valuable commodity. A healthy young man or woman could be sold in the bustling slave markets of Dublin or Dubai for a significant price, or brought back to Scandinavia to work on the farm. The woman next to you could have been born a princess in a distant land, her life violently uprooted in a single, terrifying day. Others were born into thralldom. The child of a thrall was a thrall. It was an inherited status, a cycle of servitude that was nearly impossible to break. Some were people who had fallen into debt, forced to sell themselves or their children into slavery to survive. Others might have been criminals, their punishment to serve as a thrall instead of paying a fine or being outlawed. Their life is one of relentless labor and complete submission. A thrall is not a person under the law, they are property, chattel, no different from a cow or a goat. Their master has the right of life and death over them. If a master kills his own thrall, it is not a crime. If someone else kills a thrall, as you learn it at the thing, they simply pay the master for the loss of property. A thrall cannot own property, cannot testify at the thing, and has no legal standing. You notice a dark side to this power dynamic. The sagas, while often heroic, are also frank about the exploitation of thralls. Female thralls were at the complete mercy of the men of the household. Their bodies were not their own. The children they bore to their masters were sometimes accepted into the family, but more often than not, they were born into the same servitude as their mother. This constant presence of an enslaved class had a profound effect on the Viking mindset. It created a deep-seated fear of being captured and enslaved, which in turn may have fueled the ferocity of their own raids. It also solidified a rigid social hierarchy where the identity of a free man was defined in direct opposition to the unfree thrall. Freedom was their most cherished value precisely because they lived side by side with people who had none. But was there any hope? Could a thrall ever be free? This is a point of subtle academic debate. The sagas do contain stories of thralls being granted their freedom, a process called lacing GI. A thrall could be freed by a grateful master for loyal service or for an act of great bravery, like saving the master's child from a fire. It was also possible, though rare, for a thrall to save up enough of a pittance to purchase their own freedom. However, even a freedman was not equal to a freedman. They existed in a sort of social limbo, still tied by obligations to their former master, and their new status was often precarious. Archaeological evidence for this is elusive. How do you find freedom in the dirt? Some scholars point to burial practices. A thrall might be buried with no grave goods at all. A freedman might be buried with a simple knife or a small tool, a hint of their elevated, but still humble status. It's a history read between the lines, in the absence of things. You look at the sleeping forms around you. Each one has a story, a history of loss and subjugation. To the free people of the Longhouse, they are a resource, a tool, a part of the background scenery. But you see them for what they are, a silent, captive nation, living and breathing and dreaming right under the same thatched roof. The physical dangers of this era are obvious, but this social peril, the risk of having your humanity stripped away, is a quieter, more profound kind of terror. You are one of them. Sleep, when it finally comes, is fitful and shallow. You're awoken not by the baby's cry or the stirring of the household, but by a change in the atmosphere itself. A deep, Penetrating cold has seeped into the longhouse, a cold that feels different, more permanent, than the chill of the previous morning. A wind has picked up, and it howls around the curved walls of the building, a mournful, lonely sound that seems to get under your skin. One of the car layer unbolts the heavy wooden door and pushes it open to a wall of swirling white. The first proper snow of the season has arrived overnight, and it's not a gentle dusting. It's a blizzard. The world outside is gone, replaced by a blinding, churning chaos of wind and snow. The door is quickly shut and barred, but the message is clear. Winter is here. In our modern world, winter can be an inconvenience. It means heavier traffic, higher heating bills, maybe a cancelled flight. In the Viking Age, the onset of winter was a life-or-death moment. It was called skomdegi, the short days, and it was a time of immense pressure and anxiety. The blizzard raging outside isn't a temporary disruption, it's the closing of a door. For the next several months, travel will be difficult, if not impossible. The community is now isolated, cut off from the outside world. They are on their own. The immediate effect is a shift in the longhouse's routine. All outdoor work ceases. The world shrinks to the confines of these four walls. The fire, which was already the center of life, now becomes an object of almost religious reverence. Keeping it fed is the single most important task. The stockpile of firewood and dried peat is now the most valuable treasure in the household, more precious than silver. The HUS Fraser, with her geese and her stern gaze, is now in her element. Her control over the food stores is absolute. She rations out the salted fish, the smoked meat, the barrels of grain, and the tubs of soured milk and cheese. Her calculations will determine whether they eat reasonably well through the winter or face starvation by the spring. Every meal is a careful balancing act between sustenance and conservation. You watch her and realize that the most powerful Viking warrior wasn't the man with the biggest axe, but the woman who could make a barrel of salted herring last for 5 months. Life becomes intensely claustrophobic. The air, already thick with smoke, now becomes even more stale and recycled. The smell of damp wool, unwashed bodies, and livestock intensifies. The darkness is near total, with the sun rising late and setting early, and heavy cloud cover a near constant. The days are just a few hours of murky twilight. The rest of the time is spent in the flickering, inadequate light of the fire or a few precious, foul-smelling tallow lamp. This perpetual darkness had a profound psychological effect. It's no wonder that Norse mythology is filled with tales of monsters and trolls who lurk in the dark forests and frozen wastes. Winter was when the world felt most dangerous. To combat the boredom and the oppressive gloom, they relied on community and craft. The men would spend their days mending tools, carving wood, and repairing weapons. The women would spin wool, weave cloth, and sew clothes for the coming year. It was a time of production, a long, slow preparation for the burst of activity that spring would bring, and it was a time for stories. The long winter nights were when the great sagas were told and retold, when poems about gods and heroes were recited from memory. It was how they entertained themselves, educated their children, and reinforced their cultural identity. They would play board games like HNE a strategic game similar to chess, were incredibly popular. They would drink ale, sing songs, and try to keep their spirits up. But underneath it all, the anxiety was always there. Will the food last? Will the roof hold against the weight of the snow? Will disease sweep through the crowded longhouse? This last fear was particularly potent. A winter sickness could be a death sentence for the entire household. Historians and climatologists often discuss the late antique Little Ice Age, a period of significant cooling that occurred in the 6th and 7th centuries, just before the Viking Age began. Some scholars argue that the lingering effects of this climate change, harsher winters, shorter growing seasons, were a major catalyst for the Viking expansion. When your homeland is a cold, dark, and difficult place to survive, the prospect of sailing to warmer, richer lands becomes incredibly appealing. This theory suggests that the Viking Age wasn't just born of aggression, but of desperation, a response to an increasingly hostile climate. The blizzard continues to rage for 4 days. You do not step outside, You are trapped in this smoky, noisy, crowded microcosm of humanity. You watch the faces around you. The initial novelty of being snowed in gives way to a quiet, stoic resignation. This is their reality. For you, it's an unbearable prison. The lack of privacy, the constant noise, the ever-present threat of hunger and sickness, it's a pressure cooker. You realize that surviving a Viking winter required a mental fortitude, just as strong as the physical resilience needed for farming or fighting. And as the wind howls its endless, desolate song, you're not sure you have it. After 3 long days, the blizzard finally breaks. The world outside is transformed into a silent, pristine landscape of deep white snow. But the peace is short-lived. Just as a fragile sense of normalcy begins to return to the longhouse, a rider appears. H.E.S. exhausted, his horse lathered in sweat despite the cold, and he brings with him a wave of panic that is more chilling than winter air. H.E.S. from a neighboring farmstead, a half-day's ride to the east, along the coast. He gasps out his news to the Bondi and the assembled warriors, and even though you don't catch all the words, the terror on his face is a universal language. A fleet of longships has been spotted. They are not local. Their sails are a different color. Their dragon-headed prows unfamiliar and menacing. They are strangers, and in this world, strangers, coming in force by sea mean only one thing: a raid. Suddenly, you are no longer a participant in the daily life of a Viking. You are about to become a victim of one. The romanticized image of the Viking raider, the bold adventurer, the hero of the sagas, is violently inverted. From this perspective, there is no glory, no adventure. There is only fear. The longhouse, which just moments ago was a shelter from the winter, now feels like a trap. The news spreads like wildfire. The air becomes thick with a new kind of tension, not the slow burn anxiety of winter, but the sharp metallic tang of imminent danger. The women begin to gather the children, their faces pale and drawn. The HUS Fraser is no longer just rationing food, she is directing people to secure the most valuable, portable items: a few silver trinkets, a fine sword, a ceremonial cloak. There is no time to pack. It's a frantic scramble to save what little can be saved. The Bondi and the car layer are a flurry of controlled chaos. They are not panicking, they are preparing. This is a possibility they have lived with their entire lives. They strap on leather armor, check the edges of their axes and swords, and take their round shields from the pegs on the wall. They are no longer farmers or craftsmen. They are a shield war in the making. Their grim, determined faces tell you they will fight to defend their home, their families, and their property. But you also see the fear in their eyes. They are outnumbered. The rider spoke of at least 3 ships, which could mean close to 100 well-armed, battle-hardened warriors. Your farmstead can maybe muster 20 men capable of fighting. The odds are not good. The plan is simple and desperate. The women, children, and old people, and you, the thrall, are to flee. You are to take what you can carry and run for the woods, to hide in the dense forest until the danger has passed. The men will stay. They will form a defensive line in front of the longhouse, hoping to delay the raiders to buy time for the others to escape. It's a suicide mission, and everyone knows it. You are shoved towards the back exit along with a terrified group of non-combatants. A mother is trying to quiet her crying baby, her hand shaking as she holds him. An old man clutches a small wooden chest, his life savings, probably a few pathetic coins. The sense of community and order you witnessed at the thing has evaporated, replaced by the primal instinct to survive. This experience highlights a crucial aspect of the Viking Age that is often overlooked in popular culture, which tends to focus on the raiders themselves. For every successful Viking raid, there was a community just like this one, a peaceful farming village, a quiet monastery whose world was shattered in a matter of hours. The sheer terror of a raid is hard for us to comprehend. There was no warning, no air raid siren, no time to evacuate. One moment you are going about your day, and the next, a dragon-headed ship appears on the horizon, and your life is over, or changed forever. This reality is the subject of much debate among historians. Was the violence of the Viking Age exceptional? Some scholars, pointing to the brutal descriptions in sources like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, argue that the Vikings introduced a new level of ferocity and sacrilege to European warfare. particularly with their attacks on monasteries. Others argue that this is an exaggeration, a black legend created by their victims, particularly literate churchmen who were prime targets. These revisionist historians contend that the Viking Age was no more violent than any other period of the early Middle Ages. The Franks, the Irish, they all engaged in brutal warfare and raiding against each other. The Vikings were simply the new players on the scene, and they were particularly effective because of their superb shipbuilding and seafaring skills. But these academic debates mean nothing to you right now. You are scrambling through the deep snow, your lungs burning, your heart pounding in your chest. You see the small cluster of men, your masters and captors, forming a shield wall in the cold winter light, a tiny, defiant line against the approaching storm. They are standing between you and the raiders. And for the first time, you feel a strange, conflicted flicker of hope that they will succeed, because their survival is now inextricably linked to your own. You turn and plunge deeper into the dark, silent woods, the sounds of shouting and the clash of steel beginning to echo from the direction of the farm. You run. You run harder than you've ever run in your life, stumbling through the deep snow, branches whipping at your face. The dark, silent forest that once seemed so menacing is now your only sanctuary. Behind you, the horrifying sounds of the raid fade, replaced by the pounding of your own heart and the gasps of the other fugitives. You are part of a small, terrified flock, women, children, the elderly, and the other thralls, fleeing a predator you cannot see. Huddled together in a shallow, snow-filled ravine, shivering from cold and fear, a question begins to form in your mind. A question that cuts through the immediate panic. Why do this? Why would anyone choose a life that involves crossing a treacherous, frozen sea to inflict this kind of terror and violence on others for what seems like a meager reward? The men defending the longhouse were not rich kings. They were simple farmers. What could they possibly possess that was worth such a risk? As you try to catch your breath, you start to piece together the puzzle, drawing on everything you've seen and experienced in your short, brutal time here. The answer isn't simple. It's a complex tapestry woven from geography, economics, social pressure, and technology. First and most fundamentally, look at the land itself. You've worked it. You know how rocky and unforgiving it is. The soil in much of Scandinavia is poor, and the arable land is limited, often confined to narrow strips along the fjords and coasts. As the population grew in the 8th and 9th centuries, this land came under increasing pressure. There simply wasn't enough of it to go around. A bondi might have several sons, but under their inheritance laws, typically only the eldest son would inherit the family farm. What were the younger sons to do? They could stay on as farmhands for their brother, a life of dependency, or they could strike out on their own. But where the answer lay across the water, raiding, and later, settlement was a release valve for this demographic pressure. It was a way for landless young men to acquire the wealth needed to buy their own farm, to build their own longhouse, and to become masters of their own destiny. Then there's the social pressure. You've seen it firsthand. Honor, reputation, the concept of dre everything. A young man proved his worth not by quietly tending sheep, but by demonstrating courage and martial prowess. The sagas are full of heroes who gain fame and fortune through daring voyages and successful raids. To stay at home while your peers were off going Viking, fully seen as a sign of cowardice or lack of ambition. A successful raid brought not only portable wealth like silver, jewelry, and livestock, but also immense prestige. A chieftain's power depended on his ability to attract and reward followers. The more successful he was as a raider, the more warriors would flock to his banner, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of violence and renown. And what about the victims? The places they targeted were often unprepared and vulnerable. For centuries, Western Europe had faced threats from the land. Their defenses were oriented inwards. The Vikings came from the sea, a direction no one was watching. Their long ships could strike anywhere along the coast or far upriver, and then disappear before a defensive force could be mustered. Monasteries, like the one at Lindisfarne in England, were perfect targets. They were isolated, poorly defended, and, most importantly, concentrated repositories of wealth, gold chalices, silver reliquaries, and richly embroidered vestments. To the Vikings, who did not share the Christian faith, these were not sacred objects, they were just treasure. The question of why the Viking Age started when it did is a major historical enigma. Why the late 8th century, there's no single answer. Some historians point to the internal consolidation of power in places like Denmark and Norway, which may have pushed defeated chieftains and their followers out to seek their fortunes elsewhere. Others focus on technological innovation. The development of the sail for the longship in the 8th century was a game changer. It transformed a coastal vessel into a long-range weapon, allowing for faster, more sustained voyages across the open ocean. This theory posits that the Viking Age began simply because it could. The technology finally made it possible. A more controversial theory suggests the Vikings were, in a way, responding to the expansion of the Carolingian Empire under Charlemagne. As the Franks pushed north and east, aggressively converting pagan tribes to Christianity, the Vikings may have seen this as a threat to their way of life and their gods. Their raids, in this view, were not just for plunder, but were also a preemptive or retaliatory strike against an encroaching Christian superpower. You lie in the snow, the cold seeping into your bones, and it all starts to make a horrifying kind of sense. It was just mindless barbarism. It was a product of a unique set of circumstances. It was a desperate gamble by the landless, a status symbol for the ambitious, and a strategic response to a changing world. The terror you feel, the destruction of the farmstead behind you, these are the terrible, logical outcomes of the pressures that shape this society. This raid isn't an act of pure evil. It's their job, it's their opportunity. It's their version of the struggle for survival you've been living every single day. The immediate danger has passed, but you remain hidden deep in the woods. The memory of the raid, however, has ignited a new train of thought. You keep picturing the raiders' vessels, the dragon-headed prows the messenger described. The longship. It's the iconic symbol of the Viking Age, an image of sleek, terrifying beauty and power. But as you start to think about it more practically, from the perspective of someone who might have to build and sail one, the glamour begins to fade, replaced by a sense of profound fragility. Let's imagine you weren't a victim, but part of a community preparing for a voyage. The journey begins long before you touch the water. It begins in a forest with an axe in your hand. Building a longship was a monumental undertaking, a project that required immense skill, resources, and manpower. First, you need the right tree. Not just any tree will do. For the keel, the backbone of the ship, you need a single, massive, perfectly straight oak tree. Finding one is a challenge in itself. Once found, felling it with the axes of the time is a colossal effort. But the real genius of Viking shipbuilding wasn't in sawing planks. They didn't saw. They split. They would find tall, straight-grained oak trees and, using wedges and mallets, split them into long radial planks. Known as sea-loving, follows the natural grain of the wood, resulting in planks that are incredibly strong, flexible, and far more resilient than sword boards. It's a brilliant piece of engineering, but it's also incredibly wasteful. It's estimated that only about 20% of the tree was usable for planks. To build a single ocean-going longship, you would need to fell a small forest. Once you have your planks, the construction begins. The ship is built clinker style, meaning the planks overlap each other, like shingles on a roof. They are fastened together with iron rivets, thousands of them, each one hammered in by hand. A small army of blacksmiths would be needed just to produce the rivets. The gaps between the planks are sealed with a process called caulking. You'd stuff the seams with wool or animal hair soaked in sticky pine tar. It's a messy, smelly, but vital job. One poorly sealed seam could mean disaster at sea. You watch in your mind's eye as the ship takes shape. It's long and narrow with a very shallow draft. This design is the key to its success. The shallow draft meant it could travel far upriver by passing coastal fortifications and striking deep inland when no one expected an attack. It also meant it could be beached almost anywhere. There was no need for a deep-water port. A Viking fleet could simply pull up on a sandy beach, and the warriors could leap out and be in fighting formation within minutes. But this elegant design comes with a serious trade-off. It's an open boat. There is no lower deck for shelter. no cabin for the crew. You are completely exposed to the elements. The ship is also incredibly flexible. This was by design. A flexible ship can ride the waves of the North Atlantic like a living creature, bending and twisting with the swell rather than fighting against it. But that flexibility must have been terrifying. Imagine being in the middle of a storm. The very planks beneath your feet visibly writhing and groaning, the whole vessel seeming on the verge of coming apart. The famous dragon head that adorned the prow was not just for decoration. It was a powerful symbol, meant to terrify enemies and ward off evil spirits and sea monsters. But these figureheads were often removable. The Icelander code, the GRA gas, stipulated that ships must remove their menacing figureheads before approaching Iceland, so as not to frighten the local land spirits. This gives us a fascinating insight into their worldview. A blend of fierce warrior bravado and a deep-seated, superstitious respect for the supernatural world. Historians and naval architects still marvel at the construction of these ships, and much of what we know comes from stunning archaeological finds like the Osberger and Georg ships, which were preserved in burial mounds. But there's a debate about their true seaworthiness. While they were clearly capable of crossing the Atlantic, the evidence of Vikings in North America is definitive. How safe was it? Some scholars argue that based on modern replicas, the long ship was a wet boat, meaning it took on a lot of water even in moderate seas. Bathing would have been a constant, exhausting chore. Others argue that with a skilled crew, it was a superb sea vessel. However, everyone agrees on one thing: it was not a comfortable or forgiving ride. It was a tool of war, stripped down to its bare essentials. There was no room for comfort, only for warriors, oars, and a minimal amount of supplies. It was a magnificent piece of technology, but it was also a fragile, open-topped shell you would have to trust with your life on one of the most dangerous oceans in the world. The fear and chaos of the raid have subsided, leaving a cold, heavy silence in the forest. Your mind, seeking refuge from the immediate horror, drifts back to the idea of preparing for a voyage. You've mentally built the long ship, now you have to provision it. This isn't a weekend trip. A journey from Norway to England could take a week, a trip to Iceland several weeks, and a voyage to Greenland or beyond, even longer. Let's shift your perspective again. You are no longer a thrall cowering in the woods. You are the HUS Fraser, the quartermaster of this expedition, standing on the shore next to your newly built long ship. The Bondi, your husband, and his crew of 30 warriors are ready to go. Their lives and the success of the mission depend on your foresight. The first and most critical provision is water. You can survive weeks without food, but only a few days without water. The problem is, fresh water is heavy and takes up a lot of space. It would be stored in wooden casks or leather bags. But on a long journey, in a wooden cask that isn't perfectly sealed, the water will stagnate. It will start to grow algae and taste foul. To combat this, they would likely drink low-alcohol ale or mead instead of pure water whenever possible. These beverages were more stable and provided calories, but they also carried the risk of dehydration and intoxication. You oversee the loading of the casks, tapping each one, listening to the sound, trying to gauge its integrity. A leaky cask could be a death sentence. Next is food. There are no refrigerators, no canning, no freeze-dried meals. Every food item must be preserved. The staple of any sea voyage would be SKREI, what we would call stockfish. It's cod that has been gutted and hung on wooden racks to dry in the cold, winter air until it becomes as hard as a piece of wood. It's light, it's packed with protein, and it will last for years. To eat it, you'd have to hammer it into smaller pieces and then boil it for hours to make it palatable, likely in a communal cauldron with whatever other scraps were available. Then there's the meat. Pork, beef, and mutton would be heavily salted or smoked to preserve it. This process draws out the moisture and kills bacteria, but it also makes the meat incredibly tough and salty. You'd also pack hard cheeses, which are essentially a way of preserving milk, and tubs of butter. A surprisingly important, and often overlooked, was skyr. It's a fermented dairy product, similar to a thick yogurt, that could last for a long time without refrigeration and was a vital source of protein and probiotics. For carbohydrates, you had sacks of barley or rye flour to be mixed with water and cooked into flatbreads on a small hearth sign set in a sandbox on board a risky operation on a wooden ship. More likely, you'd rely on hardtack, a simple, unleavened biscuit of flour, water, and salt, baked multiple times until it's rock hard and devoid of moisture. It was notoriously difficult to eat, often requiring it to be soaked in ale or water to be even remotely chewable, and it was a favorite home for weevils. You look at the meager pile of provisions: dried fish, salted meat, hard bread, sour milk, and barrels of water and ale. This is what 30 men will live on for weeks. There are no fruits, no fresh vegetables. Scurvy, the disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a constant threat on long voyages. While the Vikings may have had some empirical knowledge of plants that could ward it off, like certain types of seaweed or cloudberries they might have preserved, a long, unexpected delay at sea could be fatal. Skeletal remains from Viking burial sites sometimes show signs of scurvy and other nutritional deficiencies, a stark record of the perils of their diet. This brings us to a peculiar little bit of culinary history that scholars debate. Did the Vikings pack onions? It sounds trivial, but onions were one of the few vegetables that stored well, and they contained a small amount of vitamin C. The Osberger ship burial contained a bucket with wild apples and other provisions, but evidence for systematic use of anti-score, but I see vegetables is thin. Some historians argue that their diet, heavy on preserved organ meats which contain some vitamin C, might have been just enough to keep scurvy at bay on shorter trips. For longer voyages like those to North America, it was likely a calculated risk. You finish your mental inventory. The supplies look pathetic. The reality of a Viking voyage is setting in. It's not a grand adventure with nightly feasts. It's a battle against decay, hunger, and thirst. The food is monotonous, unappetizing, and barely nutritious enough to sustain life. The success of the journey depends entirely on these rotting, drying, fermenting supplies holding out just long enough. As the quartermaster, you have done all you can. Now, it's up to the sea and the god. You would watch the long ship pull away from the shore, a pit of anxiety in your stomach, knowing that you have packed for a voyage, but you may have just packed for a floating famine. The sounds of the forest, the wind in the pines, the distant cry of a bird slowly bring you back from your mental provisioning. You are still here, hiding in the snow, a refugee. But the raid, the imagined preparations, the building of the ship, it all leads to one inevitable moment, the departure. Let's change your role one last time. You are no longer a thrall, no longer the HUS Fraser. You are a young woman, perhaps the daughter of the Bondi or the wife of one of the Carlayar. Your father, or husband, or brother, is about to leave on the voyage you just provisioned. You stand on the cold, stony shore of the fjord, the newly built longship floating on the calm, dark water. The air is filled with a strange mixture of excitement and dread. For the young unmarried men, this is a rite of passage, their first time going Viking. They are full of bravado, laughing too loudly, clapping each other on the back, their eyes gleaming with the promise of adventure and silver. They are eager to prove themselves, to make a name and a fortune. They see the horizon as a promise. For the older, more seasoned warriors, there is a quieter, more somber mood. They've done this before. They know the reality that lies beyond the calm waters of fjord. They know the back-breaking labor of rowing, the gnawing hunger, the terror of a North Atlantic storm, and the brutal, chaotic reality of a raid. They are methodically checking their gear one last time, their movements efficient and practiced. They are saying goodbye to their families with a gravity that speaks volumes. You watch your loved one. He hugs his children, his hands lingering on their heads for a moment too long. He embraces you, and in that brief, tight hug, 1,000 unspoken things are communicated. The promises to be careful, the fears of what might happen, the hope of a safe return. There are no tearful, dramatic farewells. This society values stoicism and emotional restraint. Public displays of grief or fear would be seen as unmanly, a bad omen. The goodbyes are short, almost curt, but heavy with unspoken emotion. As the men begin to board the ship, climbing over the gunwale, finding their places on the simple rowing benches, a priestess of the old faith might perform a ritual. She might sacrifice a chicken or a goat, sprinkling its blood on the prow of the ship, and offering to the sea god NJ for safe passage, and to Thor for protection from storms. She might read the runes, casting carved pieces of wood or bone and interpreting the patterns to foretell the outcome of the voyage. The air would be thick with superstition and hope, a desperate appeal to the powerful, unpredictable forces that govern their world. The anchor is raised. The men unfurl the sail, a large square piece of wool dyed in colorful vertical stripes. It catches the wind, and the long ship begins to glide away from the shore, silent and graceful. The men who aren't managing the sail sit at their benches, their shields hung neatly along the side of the ship, creating the iconic image of a shield-lined vessel. They are not rowing yet, the sail will carry them out of the fjord. You stand on the shore, a silent figure among the other women and children left behind. You watch the ship grow smaller and smaller until it is just a speck against the vast, grey emptiness of the sea and sky. And then, it's gone. What now for those left behind? Life enters a state of suspended animation. You must continue the daily grind, tend the fields, manage the household, raise the children, but always with one ear listening for news, one eye scanning the horizon. You will live with a constant, low-level anxiety for weeks, months, maybe even a full year. Did they reach their destination? Were they successful? Were they caught in a storm? Were they defeated in battle? There is no way to know. There are no letters, no long-distance communication. There is only waiting. The uncertainty was a heavy burden, and one that historians often struggle to fully capture. The sagas focus on the adventures of the men at sea, but the emotional and economic backbone of the society was the women who kept the homesteads running in their absence. This part of the story is quieter, less dramatic, but no less heroic. This is a point of quiet academic contention, the emotional landscape of the Viking Age. Were these stoic people, hardened by a brutal life, less prone to the anxieties and griefs we feel today, or was their stoicism simply a cultural mask, hiding a roiling sea of emotions that were just as powerful as our own funerary evidence, like the famous O's Berbish grave goods for two women, suggests deep bonds and profound grief. The poetry, full of laments for lost comrades and loved ones, also speaks to a rich emotional life. You turn away from the empty sea and walk back towards the long house. The farm feels hollow now, emptier, quieter. The world is a little less safe with its defenders gone. All you can do is wait, and hope, and try not to think about the 100 different ways that the sea, or other men, could swallow them whole. The adventure has begun for them, for you. The long vigil has just started. Your mind drifts away from the shore, from the waiting, and you find yourself on the ship. You are no longer an observer on the land, you are a participant in the voyage. The initial excitement of leaving the fjord has faded, replaced by the grim, monotonous reality of life at sea. The first thing that strikes you is the sheer lack of space. The long ship, which looked so sleek and impressive from the shore, is now a cramped, floating prison. It's about 20 meters long and maybe 5 meters wide at its broadest point, but most of that space is taken up by rowing benches, the mast rigging, and supplies. 30 men are crammed into this tiny vessel. You are shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow. There is no room to stretch, no place to walk. To get from one end of the ship to the other, you have to climb over your bench mates and their gear. Personal space is a forgotten luxury. The ship is completely open to the elements. There is no cabin, no deck, no roof. When it rains, you get wet. When the sun beats down, you get burned. But the most constant companion is the sea spray. The ship rides low in the water, and even in a moderate swell, waves constantly break over the sides, drenching everything and everyone. A bone-deep, persistent dampness settles into your clothes, your blanket, and your very soul. It is impossible to ever feel truly dry. At night, it's even worse. There are no designated sleeping quarters. You sleep where you use it. The crew would likely have worked in shifts, one half rowing or sailing while the other half tried to rest. Your bed is the hard wooden bench you've been rowing on all day, Kit, which is inevitably damp, trying to find a position that doesn't leave you with splinters. Some men might have had leather sleeping bags, which offered slightly better protection from the wet, but these were a luxury. You lie there listening to the creak of the hull, the flap of the sail, the snores of the man next to you, and the endless rush of water just inches below your ear. Sleep is a rare and precious commodity. What do you do all day if there's a good wind you sail? This requires a small, skilled team to manage the large, unruly square sail in the steering or at the stern. But the winds of the North Atlantic are fickle. When the wind dies or when it's blowing from the wrong direction, you row. This is back-breaking, mind-numbing labor. You sit on your bench, your feet braced against the plank in front of you, and you pull. You pull in rhythm with the men around you, hour after hour, and your hands quickly become blistered and raw. Your world shrinks to the sweaty back of the man in front of you and the endless, repetitive motion of the oar. There are no bathrooms. A bucket, emptied over the side, serves as the communal toilet, offering absolutely no privacy. Hygiene is non-existent. You are wearing the same clothes you left in, and they are now stiff with salt and grime. The smell on the ship of unwashed bodies, stale food, bilge water, and fear is overpowering. Food is the only real break in the monotony. The crew would gather around the small, sand-filled hearth box if conditions were calm enough to risk a fire. More often, you'd eat cold. You'd gnaw on a piece of rock-hard dried fish and a chunk of hardtack, washing it down with a swig of stale water or sour ale from a shared water skin. It's fuel, not food, and there's never enough of it. This harsh reality challenges the romantic image of the Viking sailor. They were not gracefully gliding across the waves. They were engaged in a constant, grueling battle for survival against the environment. This has led some historians to debate the very nature of their voyages. Were they primarily sailing ships that used stores as a backup, or rowing ships that used to sail when convenient? The answer likely depends on the type of ship and the nature of the journey. For long-distance travel across the open ocean, the sail was essential. For coastal raiding and navigating fjords and rivers, the oars gave them the speed, maneuverability, and independence from the wind that they needed. The long ship was a brilliant hybrid, but it demanded immense physical endurance from its crew. You look at the faces of the men around you. They are gaunt, their eyes ringed with exhaustion. Their hands are bleeding, their backs are sore, and they are perpetually cold and wet. This is the price of adventure. This is the reality behind the sagas. It's not a glorious quest, it's a miserable, cramped, and you have been at sea for only a few days. The real dangers haven't even begun yet. A few days into the voyage, the initial misery of dampness and exhaustion is eclipsed by a new, more insidious enemy. The sea, which had been relatively calm, begins to change. The gentle swells grow into large, rolling waves, and the long ship, once gliding, now starts to pitch and yaw in an unpredictable, nauseating rhythm. You are experiencing one of the most debilitating and dangerous ailments of ancient seafaring, severe seasickness. In the modern world, we think of seasickness as a temporary discomfort, something a pill or a patch can solve. But in this context, it's a life-threatening condition. You feel the first wave of nausea deep in your gut. A cold sweat breaks out on your forehead. The world seems to tilt and spin, and the constant motion of the ship becomes an unbearable torture. There is no escape. You can't get off. You can't find a stable point to focus on. There is only the relentless, chaotic movement of the sea. You lose your meager breakfast of dried fish over the side of the ship. But the vomiting doesn't stop. Your body is racked with violent, painful heaves, long after your stomach is empty. You are not alone. Several of the other men, especially the younger ones on their first voyage, are in the same state. Their faces are a pale, greenish white, and they lie slumped over their benches, too weak to even lift their heads. The physical effects are brutal. The constant vomiting leads to rapid dehydration and a loss of essential electrolytes. Your body becomes weak and trembles uncontrollably. Your head pounds and you feel dizzy and disoriented. You are completely incapacitated, unable to row, unable to help manage the sail, unable to even bail the water that is sloshing around your ankles. You become a liability, another piece of useless cargo for the healthy crew members to worry about. The seasoned warriors, their faces grim, either have stronger stomachs or are better at hiding their misery. They carry on, stepping over the sick, their expressions a mixture of pity and contempt. In this world, weakness is a danger not just to yourself, but to the entire crew. If too many men succumb to sea's incus, the ship becomes unmanageable, vulnerable to the whims of the sea. This raises a fascinating and often overlooked area of bioarchaeology, trying to understand the physical constitution of ancient peoples. Did Vikings have some sort of genetic predisposition, an inner ear that was better adapted to the motion of the sea? This is a point of academic speculation, but it's unlikely. While individuals who were less prone to sea's incus would certainly have had an advantage and been more likely to undertake and survive sea voyages, the condition is a fundamental human response. It's more likely that they simply endured it through sheer force of will and repeated exposure. The sagas occasionally mention men being sea-tossed but rarely dwell on the inglorious details of sea's incus. It didn't fit the heroic narrative. Yet, archaeological evidence gives us clues. The study of Viking skeletons can reveal information about their physical stress and diet, but not about a temporary affliction like sea's incus. However, some scholars have looked at the placement of hearths and cooking areas on ships. The fact that they were often placed in the most stable part of the vessel suggests a pragmatic understanding of the factors that could trigger nausea. The real danger of sea's incus wasn't just the weakness it caused. It was the mental toll. As you lie there shivering and miserable, a profound sense of despair begins to set in. The world is reduced to a spinning, heaving nightmare from which there is no waking. You feel helpless, and the thought of dying out here, being unceremoniously dumped into the cold, grey water, feels terrifyingly plausible. Your will to live begins to erode. Psychology is as important as physical health. A crew that loses its morale is a crew that is already lost. After what feels like an eternity, the storm begins to subside. The waves become less violent, and the motion of the ship settles into a more predictable rhythm. The nausea slowly recedes, leaving you utterly drained, your throat raw, your muscles aching. You are weak, dehydrated, and humiliated. You take a tentative sip of water, and it stays down. You have survived this bout, but the fear of its return will now be your constant companion. You've just learned a harsh lesson. The most formidable monster in the North Sea isn't a kraken or a serpent. It's your own body's rebellion against the unnatural act of floating on a vast, unforgiving ocean. You barely recovered from the bout of sea's incus when a new, more subtle terror descends. It began yesterday. A low-lying bank of fog rolled in, and it has not left. It clings to the ship like a wet, grey shroud, reducing visibility to a few meters. The world has shrunk to the length of your vessel, the sea. The sun all have vanished, swallowed by an impenetrable, featureless mist. You are adrift in a sea of white. This is a navigator's worst nightmare. In an age before the magnetic compass, GPS, or even the most rudimentary charts, Viking sailors navigated using a sophisticated but fragile set of techniques that relied on being able to see. By observing the sun's position at midday, they could get a rough idea of their latitude. They used simple but clever tools like a sun shadow board, a wooden disc with a central pin. By marking the length of the shadow at different times of the day, they could find the shortest shadow, which indicated noon, and thus south. At night, they used the stars. The North Star, Polaris, was their fixed point, a celestial anchor in the northern sky. By observing its height above the horizon, they could also gauge their latitude. They had an intimate knowledge of the constellations and how they moved across the sky throughout the night and the seasons. But in this thick, soupy fog, all of that is useless. The sun is just a faint, diffuse brightness somewhere above the mist. The stars are completely hidden. You are sailing blind. The crew falls silent. The usual banter and grumbling cease, replaced by a tense, watchful quiet. The chieftain stands at the stern, his hand on the steering oar, his face a mask of concentration, trying to hold a steady course based on nothing but memory and instinct. But how long can that last? Are you still heading west, or have you been slowly, imperceptibly, turned by a current or a shift in the wind? The fear of sailing in a circle, lost and directionless, is a palpable presence on the ship. Without the sun or stars, the sailors fall back on more ancient, more subtle arts. They read the patterns of the waves, the direction of the swell, which can often indicate the direction of the prevailing wind, even when the wind itself is calm. They watch for signs of life. The type of seabird can tell you how far you are from land. A gannet or a puffin means land is likely near. A fulmar, on the other hand, is a true deep ocean bird. Seeing one is no comfort. They might even have brought caged birds, like ravens, on board. The famous Viking explorer effortlessly the first Norseman to deliberately sail to Iceland, was said to have used ravens to find his way, and if it circled and returned to the ship, it meant there was no land in sight. If it flew off in a specific direction, the ship would follow, trusting the bird's instinct. But out here in this deep fog, there are no birds. There is no swell. The sea is eerily calm. The only sound is the drip of condensation from the rigging onto the deck. The hours crawl by. The despair is thicker than the fog. Every creak of the ship, every splash of a wave against the hull, sounds like it could be a rock. The fear of suddenly running aground on an unseen shore, or smashing into an iceberg, is immense. The chieftain makes a difficult decision. He orders the sail to be lowered. To continue sailing blind is too risky. It's better to be stationary and lost than to be moving and lost. So you wait. You float in the endless grey, a tiny, insignificant speck of wooden humanity in a vast, indifferent ocean. The food supplies are dwindling. The water tastes stale. The morale of the crew is at its lowest point yet. You are not just lost in a geographical sense. You are lost from the world, erased by the fog. The physical danger of a storm is one thing, but this psychological erosion, this slow dawning horror of being utterly and completely lost, is a far more terrifying kind of peril. The fog finally, mercifully, lifts. But it's not a gentle dissipation. It's torn apart by a rising wind that carries a new and more immediate threat. The sky, which was a uniform grey, now darkens to a bruised, angry purple on the horizon. The sea, which was eerily calm, begins to heave and swell with a menacing energy. The seasoned sailors on board exchange grim, knowing glances. A storm is coming. A real North Atlantic storm. There's no time for fear. Panic is a luxury you can't afford. The chieftain barks orders, his voice sharp and clear, cutting through the rising howl of the wind. Every man, even the one still weak from seasickness, is jolted into action. The large, square-wool sail is a huge liability in a high wind. It must be brought down and secured before it's torn to shreds or worse. Acts like a giant kite, capsizing the ship. You and several other men struggle with the heavy, wet canvas, the wind like a wild beast. Your fingers are numb, your muscles straining. The mast, a single tall-pine trunk, groans under the strain. Finally, the sail is down and lashed securely to the deck. Next, all loose gear, casks, chests, weapons is tied down. Anything that can be washed overboard will be. The first giant wave hits the ship. It's not a splash, it's a solid wall of green, icy water that crashes over the side, sweeping men off their feet. The long ship groans and shudders, but its flexible clinker-built hull does its job, twisting and bending with the force of the water rather than breaking. You are instantly soaked to the skin with water so cold it feels like 1,000 needles. The ship plunges down the back of the wave, your stomach lurching, only to be lifted up on the crest of the next one, suspended for a terrifying moment between the churning sea and the black sky. The world dissolves into a chaos of roaring wind, crashing waves, and driving rain. The only light comes from blinding flashes of lightning that reveal a hellish sea steppe of mountainous waves and deep black troughs. You are no longer sailing, you are surviving. Your job, along with half the crew, is to bail. You are given a bucket, and you scoop and throw, in a desperate, frantic rhythm. For every bucket of water you throw out, another wave crashes in. It feels like a futile, hopeless task, like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. But you cannot stop. To stop means the ship fills with water, becomes sluggish and unresponsive, and will inevitably be swamped and sink. Your life depends on this repetitive, exhausting motion. The other half of the crew is at the oars. They are not trying to make headway, but to keep the ship's bow pointed into the waves. If the ship turns sideways to the swell, an act called broaching, it will be rolled over and capsize in an instant. The men row with all their strength, their faces set in grim masks of determination, fighting to keep the vessel under control. At the stern, the chieftain wrestles with the steering oar, a massive plank of wood, his muscles straining as he battles the overwhelming power of the sea. He is not just steering a ship, he is wrestling a monster. This experience highlights the inherent vulnerability of the longship. For all its strengths, its speed, its shallow draft, it was still an open boat. There was no safe haven, no below decks to retreat to. You were completely exposed to the full fury of the storm. This has led to a debate among nautical archaeologists. How did they handle storms of this magnitude? The sagas are full of dramatic shipwrecks, but they are light on the technical details of survival. Some theories suggest they may have used a drogue, or sea anchor, a bucket, or a cone of canvas trailed behind the ship to create drag and keep the stern pointed into the wind, but physical evidence for this is lacking. It's more likely they relied on pure seam and endurance. They would ride it out, bailing and rowing, for as long as it took, for as long as their strength held out. Ours blur into an eternity of noise, cold and terror. Men are screaming to be heard over the wind. The ship is a tiny, insignificant thing, tossed about at the mercy of immense, impersonal forces. You see the fear in the eyes of the men around you, but you also see a core of iron resilience. They are not giving up. They are fighting for every inch, for every moment. You look up during a flash of lightning and see a wave, larger than all the others, looming over the ship. It's a moving mountain of water, its crest foaming white. This is it. There is no time to shout, no time to pray. You brace yourself for the impact, for the crushing final cold. The wave breaks over you, and the world goes black. You are underwater. The world is a maelstrom of churning, freezing blackness. Your lungs are on fire. You are tangled in a rope, and your frantic struggles only make it tighter. This is how it ends, you think, drowned and lost in a nameless storm. Then, miraculously, the rope breaks or you kick free, and your survival instinct propels you upward. You break the surface, gasping, sputtering, inhaling a mixture of air and sea spray. The ship is still there. It's half swamped, sitting low and heavy in the water, but it has capsized. You are hauled back aboard by a crewmate, your limbs numb and useless. You collapse onto the deck, shivering uncontrollably, a profound, bone-deep exhaustion settling over you. The storm, having thrown its worst at you, finally begins to move on. The wind lessens its maniacal howl, the waves decrease in size, and the black sky slowly lightens to a bruised, sullen grey. The immediate terror is over, but it is replaced by a cold, quiet despair. You take stock of the situation. It is grim. The men were washed overboard by that last monstrous wave. They are gone. There was no chance of rescue. The mast is splintered, a jagged wreck. The sail which you had so carefully secured was torn loose and has vanished into the sea. One of the water casks broke free from its lashings and was smashed, its precious contents lost. The small supply of dried fish is a sodden, ruined mess. You are alive, but you are adrift in a crippled vessel with less food, less water, and fewer men than when you started. The elation of survival is quickly extinguished by the stark reality of your predicament. The silence on board is heavier than the storm ever was. The men sit slumped on their benches, their faces hollow with shock and grief. The bravado is gone. The warrior spirit is gone. All that remains is a handful of cold, hungry, and exhausted humans lost in the middle of a vast ocean. This is the point where the true test begins. Not the test of a warrior's strength, but the test of a human's will to live. Hunger begins to set in, not the familiar pangs of a missed meal, but a deep, gnawing emptiness. You ration out the remaining hardtack, each man receiving a single, small biscuit, which is now damp and chewy. The water is rationed even more strictly, each man allowed only a few sips a day from the remaining cask. Thirst becomes a constant, maddening obsession. Your tongue feels thick and swollen, your throat is dry and scratchy. Days pass. The sun comes out, but it offers no comfort. It only beats down on you, increasing your thirst and blistering your skin. You try to fish, trailing lines over the side, but the sea that was so violently present during the storm is now barren and empty. Nothing bites. The social fabric of the crew begins to fray. Men become withdrawn and sullen. Arguments break out over a stolen crumb of biscuit or a perceived extra sip of water. The chieftain's authority, once absolute, is now tenuous. He tries to maintain order, but his words are hollow. He is just as hungry and thirsty as everyone else. You see the veneer of Viking honor, of camaraderie and warrior ethos, being stripped away, revealing the raw, desperate animal underneath. This grim scenario is a recurring theme in historical accounts of shipwrecked sailors from all eras. The breakdown of social order in the face of starvation is a well-documented phenomenon. But how did the Vikings, with their strong emphasis on loyalty in the warband, cope with such extremes? The sagas, typically focused on heroism, are often silent on these ugliest aspects of survival. However, there are dark hints. Some of the more grim archaeological finds human bones with cut marks found in contexts that suggest cannibalism have led to intense and controversial speculation among scholars. Was ritual cannibalism a part of their religious practice, or was survival cannibalism the last desperate resort for starving sailors? There is no consensus, only disturbing questions. You look at your crewmates. They are no longer your shield brothers. They are your competitors for the last drops of water, the last crumbs of food. You eye them with suspicion, and they look at you the same way. The real enemy is not the sea or the sky. It is the creeping, insidious despair that whispers in your ear, telling you to give up, that all is lost. You lie on the deck, staring at the endless, empty horizon, feeling your strength, your hope, and your humanity slowly draining away. This is a quieter, more terrifying battle than the storm. It's a battle against yourself, and you are losing. You are drifting between a state of waking and a half-conscious stupor. The world has been reduced to a few miserable sensations: the burning sun on your skin, the gnawing pit in your stomach, and a thirst so profound it feels like your whole body is turning to dust. Hope is a distant memory. You no longer scan the horizon, you just stare, your eyes unfocused, waiting for the end. Then, someone croaks. A dry, rasping sound. HES pointing. You slowly, painfully, lift your head and follow his gaze. At first, you see nothing. Just the endless, shimmering line where the blue of the sea meets the blue of the sky. You think it's a hallucination, a cruel trick of a starving mind. It's not a cloud. It is a faint, dark line on the horizon, a smudge. It's so faint it could be a mirage. No one dares to speak the word. The fear of it being false is too great. But every man on board is now staring at that smudge, a flicker of desperate energy returning to their weary bodies. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the smudge grows. It resolves itself from a faint line into a solid shape. It is uneven, with peaks and dips. It is land. A cheer goes up, but it's a weak, pathetic sound, more a collective sigh of disbelief than a shout of joy. The men, who were slumped in a torpor just moments ago, are now animated. They are grabbing the oars, finding their places, their movements clumsy but filled with a renewed purpose. The chieftain is at the steering oar, his voice stronger now, calling out a rhythm. You take your place at an oar. It feels impossibly heavy. Your muscles scream in protest. But the sight of that dark line on the horizon is a more powerful fuel than any food. You pull. The man in front of you pulls. The man behind you pulls. The crippled ship begins to move sluggishly at first, then with a steady, desperate rhythm, inching its way towards salvation. As you get closer, details emerge. It's a green and grey coastline, rocky, with cliffs and a line of dark forest beyond a narrow beach. It's not the gentle, rolling farmland of England or the familiar shape of your home fjord. Where are you? Have you been blown completely off course? Are you in Ireland, the land of the Franks, or some uninhabited island in the middle of nowhere? The relief of seeing land is now mixed with a new anxiety. Who lives here? Are they friendly, or will you be met on the beach by hostile warriors? You have no sail, your ship is damaged, and you are in no condition to fight. You are weak, vulnerable, and at the mercy of whoever you find. This uncertainty was a constant feature of Viking exploration. When they landed in Iceland, they found a largely uninhabited island, But when they landed in North America, which they called Vinland, they encountered indigenous peoples they called Deskalingja. The Norse sagas describe a brief and violent relationship, a mixture of failed trade and bloody skirmishes that ultimately led the Vikings to abandon their settlement. The encounter between these two worlds, one from the east and one from the west, is a pivotal moment in human history, and one that is still being pieced together by archaeologists. The debate continues over the exact location of the Vinland settlement and the nature of their interactions with the native population. Were the Vikings driven out by a hostile reception, or did they simply find the colony too difficult to sustain from so far away? Your immediate concern is more practical. As you row closer, you scan the shore for any sign of settlement, takeoff of smoke, a roofline, a boat pulled up on the beach. You see nothing. For now, it seems deserted. This is both a relief and a problem. It means no immediate threat, but it also means no source of aid. The keel of the long ship finally scrapes against the sand of the beach. The sound is beautiful, the most welcome noise you have ever heard. You and the other men practically fall out of the boat, stumbling into the shallow water and crawling onto the solid, unmoving land. You press your face against the wet sand, the stability of the earth a profound comfort after weeks of being tossed on the sea. You have made it. You have survived the storm and the starvation. You are alive. You have reached land. But, as you lie there, exhausted and broken on this strange and silent shore, you realize this is not the end of your ordeal. It's just the beginning of a new one. You spend 2 days on that deserted beach, recovering your strength. Fresh water from a small stream and a few shellfish gathered from the rocks work as slow magic on your depleted bodies. The immediate desperation has passed, replaced by a weary resolve. Your ship is a wreck, you are far from home, and your original mission, whatever it was, is a failure. The only goal now is to survive and, somehow, get back. Following the coast, you eventually spotted a small settlement nestled in a cove. It's not a grand town, just a handful of longhouses much like the one you started in. This is your chance. You are weak, but you are still Vikings. You have axes and shields. The chieftain gathers the remaining men. The plan is not to trade, not to ask for help. The plan is to raid. This is the moment the entire journey was for, but as you prepare, the grim reality of it feels utterly different from the heroic tales. You are not a proud warrior arriving on a sleek long ship. You are a desperate, shipwrecked survivor about to attack a community of people who are no different from your own family back home. You approach the village at dawn, moving through the woods with as much stealth as you can muster. The element of surprise is your only real advantage. There are no dramatic speeches, no battle cries. Just a grim, silent advance. The chieftain gives a signal, and you rush out of the trees towards the nearest longhouse. The battle is a chaotic, clumsy, and pathetic affair. It's not a clash of shield walls, it's a series of frantic, one-on-one struggles. The villagers, roused from their sleep, are confused and terrified. They are farmers, fishermen, not professional warriors. An old man comes out of a longhouse holding a wood-cutting axe, his face a mixture of fear and defiance. One of your crewmates, a boy on his first raid, hesitates for a fatal second, and the old man brings the axe down. You find yourself fighting a man about your own age. HES armed with a fishing spear. He is not trying to kill you, he is trying to defend his home. You see the terror in his eyes, and it mirrors your own. You swing your axe. It's heavy and awkward. You are not a seasoned warrior. You are a starving survivor. Your blow is clumsy, but it connects. There is no glory in it. There is no glory in it. No feeling in the pit of your stomach. The raid is over in minutes. The village is subdued. The cost is high. You lost another man, the young boy. The villagers lost 3, including the man you fought. The rest are huddled together, the women weeping, the men staring with hatred. Now comes the plunder. You search the longhouses. What do you find? There is no secret hoard of silver, no chests of gold. You find what you would expect to find in a poor, subsistence-level farming community. Some salted fish, a few wheels of cheese, wools and homespun cloth. A couple of iron tools, a bronze brooch on one of the women. That's it. This is the grand treasure you crossed an ocean and survived a storm for. This meager haul gets to the heart of a historical debate about the profitability of raiding. While some raids, particularly on wealthy, undefended monasteries, were spectacularly successful and brought immense wealth, many, perhaps most, were probably like this one. They were risky, high-cost ventures with a very low and uncertain return. Some historians argue that raiding was not a sustainable economic model, but more of a get-rich-quick scheme for the young and reckless, with a very high failure rate. The real wealth of the Viking Age, they contend, was not in raiding, but in trade, in agriculture. The vast trading networks the Vikings established, from Constantinople to Canada, were ultimately far more significant and profitable than the smash-and-grab violence of the raids. You and your crew gather your pathetic loot. You also take something else. You take the villagers' only fishing boat, a small, sturdy vessel, but nothing like your longship. And you take food, all the food you can carry. You are leaving them with nothing, on the cusp of winter. You are essentially sentencing them to a slow starvation, the very fate you just escaped. As you prepare to leave, you look at the faces of the people you have just terrorized. You see your own mother, your own sister, your own father in their eyes. The line between raider and victim, which seemed so clear when you were hiding in the woods, has completely blurred. You are both. You have become the monster you once feared. You get in the stolen boat and push off from the shore, leaving the smoking, grieving village behind. There is no cheering, no celebration. Just the grim silence of men who have seen the true face of what they do. It's not glorious. It's just theft and violence, born of desperation. The great adventure has ended in a squalid, miserable crime. And you still have to get home. The stolen boat is a poor substitute for the long ship. It's small, slow, and feels fragile in the open water. You are packed in tightly with the other survivors, a small, grim remnant of the proud crew that set out from home. The meager loot, a few textiles, some smoked fish, a single bronze brooch sits in a pathetic pile at the bottom of the boat, slick with bilge water. The journey home is a long, arduous crawl. You row in shifts, your movement sluggish, your body still weak. The silence is profound. The easy camaraderie of the outward voyage, the shared jokes and songs, is gone. It died in the storm, it died on the beach. Now, you are just a collection of individuals bound by a shared trauma under desperate, common goal. A business partnership, a fallacy that has gone bankrupt in the most brutal way possible. You find yourself doing a grim, silent accounting. You look at the empty spaces in the boat. There's where the young boy who died on the beach used to sit. There's where the two men lost in the storm used to row. You count the faces of the living and the ghosts of the dead. You weigh the lives lost against the pathetic pile of plunder. The calculation is sickeningly simple. It wasn't worth it. It wasn't even close. This voyage was a failure. A catastrophic failure. Under a vast and empty sky, you wonder how many other voyages end like this. The sagas only tell the stories of the winners, of the heroes who return with ships laden with silver and fame. But for every one of them, how many others are there? How many crews starve in a crippled boat, are lost in a fog, or are cut down on a foreign shore for a handful of cheese and a stolen fishing boat? Perhaps this is why things are changing back home. You've heard the stories. Powerful kings are rising, men who are trying to unite the lands under a single rule. They call themselves kings of Norway or Denmark. They imposed axes, they build fortresses, and they discourage men from going Viking on their own. They want armies, not freelancers. They want trade routes, not chaotic raids. And then there's the new god, the White Christ. His priests preach a message of peace and forgiveness, a message completely at odds with the old gods of war and vengeance. This new faith is spreading, and with it, a new way of seeing the world. This leads you to a final profound question. Where does a Viking go when the Viking Age ends? Historians are still debating what truly brought the age of the long ships to a close. Was it the coming influence of the Christian cross, replacing the hammer of Thor? Was it the rise of organized kingdoms and taxable economies that made farming more profitable than plunder? Or was it simply that Europe got better at fighting back? Building castles and raising armies that made raiding too costly. The answer is likely all of the above. The world changed, and the Vikings had to change with it. And many of them did. This is a secret the sagas don't always shout about. Not everyone who went Viking came home. Many found a better life abroad. They settled in the fertile fields of England, in the green valleys of Normandy, or along the great rivers of Russia, becoming the local lords and farmers. They traded their axes for plowshares. Some traveled as far as Constantinople, serving as elite mercenaries in the Byzantine emperors Via and Gion Guard, trading a life of uncertain plunder for a steady, handsome wage. The ultimate goal of a voyage was always to return home rich. For many, the goal was simply to not have to return home at all. You look at the grey, familiar line of the coast of Norway finally appearing on the horizon. You are one of the ones who is returning, but you are not the same person who left. The dreams of glory and silver have been washed away by salt water and blood. You are a survivor, yes. But you are also a failure, a thief, and a killer. You have seen the truth behind the legends, the ugly, brutal mechanics of what it means to be a Viking. The heroic age is a lie. You will be celebrated as a survivor who returned from the dead. But you will always know the true cost of that survival, and you will carry that knowledge, like a cold stone in your gut, for the rest of your days. The rhythmic creak of the oars begins to fade, softening into a gentle rocking motion. The cold, sharp edges of the sea spray dissolve into a fine, cool mist that touches your face like a whisper. You are on the water still, but the journey is over now, and the boat is no longer moving towards a destination, but simply drifting on a calm, quiet sea of silvered glass. The voices of the crew, their shouts and their groans, have fallen silent, becoming just echoes in the vast, empty space between the water and the stars. The world has grown soft and blurry at the edges. The hard bench beneath you seems to melt away, becoming as soft as packed snow, as yielding as a bed of moss. The weight of the axe in your hand is gone. The fear in your heart has subsided into a deep and profound stillness. The faces of the victims, they are no longer sharp and clear in your minds, or they are like old portraits, fading into the great twilight of memory. You are floating now, not on a boat, but in the gentle current of a dream, where the water is dark and deep and safe. The pull of the oars has become the pull of sleep, drawing you down into a quiet place where there are no storms, no hunger, no fear. The sky above is a blanket of deep, endless velvet, and the rocking of the waves is a lullaby, a final, gentle promise of rest. Let the current take you. Let the darkness be a comfort. The end of the article. Good night.